Saturday, June 24th, 2017, Monaco 64, home of alternative economics and contrarian views. So I'd like to talk about the Federal Reserve today, Goldman Sachs, and Charles Lindbergh Sr., and also recessions. And Charles Lindbergh Sr., he was Charles Lindbergh's father, the famous aviator who crossed the Atlantic on the Spirit, in the Spirit of St. Louis. I think it was 1927. That was his father. His father, Charles Lindbergh Sr., was a congressman from Minnesota from 1907 to 1917. And he opposed the creation of the Federal Reserve and the Federal Reserve Act. He also opposed the United States entering World War I. So he's an interesting individual. I know his son is a lot more famous than him. I remember even in school learning about Lindbergh, but it wasn't this one. It was his son, you know, the famous aviator. And the reason I want to talk about him is he's made some really interesting quotes about the Federal Reserve and the monetary system. And why have I brought Goldman Sachs into this? Well, because Goldman apparently is saying that, you know, the reason for most modern recessions is the Fed, and that the Fed has caused the most recessions by raising interest rates. And most people think, you know, when Yellen testifies to Congress or gives press conference that, you know, the Fed has got this mandate to create low unemployment and economic growth. You'd think, why would the Fed cause recessions? But that's how, you know, the central banking system operates, by creating booms and busts artificially so they can enrich the people who control the system. And that's why we've got now, you know, less than 1% controlling the vast majority of the wealth of not only the world, but also the United States. So Mr. Lindbergh, Charles Lindbergh Sr., knew what this was going to result into, and he was quite prescient, I would say. And I'll you know, read out some of his quotes here that I got from Wikipedia, his famous quotes. One of them is, "This Federal Reserve Act establishes the most gigantic trust on earth." I've talked about that already, that central banks are nothing but monopolies or cartels. He knew it. "When the President, Woodrow Wilson, signs this bill, the invisible government of the monetary power will be legalized. The worst legislative crime of the ages is perpetrated by this banking and currency bill." One thing I'd like to say, you know, prior to 1914, there were, of course, booms and busts, but there was no central bank, you know, I guess from 1837 to 1914, there was no central banks. So yes, there were booms and busts. A lot of people made a lot of money and lost a lot of money, but it wasn't legalized. It wasn't controlled by a group of, you know, a small group of individuals. He goes on to say, another quote, "This act establishes the most gigantic trust on earth." I think it's just a repetition of the first quote, but I'll keep going because it changes at the end. And it says, "When the President signs this bill, the invisible government by the monetary power will be legalized. The people may not know it immediately, but the day of reckoning is only a few years removed." I guess he was wrong about the day of reckoning. I mean, I think we're there now. You know, the finance totally controls the West now. It's the monetary power, you know, the invisible government. And he goes on to say, "The worst legislative crime of the ages is perpetrated by this banking bill." And the other quote he makes is, "A radical is one who speaks the truth." That's an interesting one. The interesting one about recession is this. It says, "To cause high prices, all the Federal Reserve Board will will be to lower the rediscount rate, producing an expansion of credit and a rising stock market. Does that sound familiar? Then, when businessmen are adjusted to these conditions, it can check prosperity in mid-career by arbitrarily raising the rate of interest. It can cause the pendulum of a rising and falling market to swing gently back and forth by slight changes in the discount rate, or cause violent fluctuations by a greater rate variation, and in either case it will possess inside information as to financial conditions and advanced knowledge of the coming change, either up or down. He goes on to say, this is the strangest, most dangerous advantage ever placed in the hands of a special privileged class by any government that ever existed. The system is private, conducted for the sole purpose of obtaining the greatest possible profits from the use of other people's money, i.e. the American public, the British public, the European public. You've noticed, like, the people who control the system, the people near the top, near the central banks, they're getting richer and richer, and the general public is getting poorer and poorer. And I think the next time, they pull the plug, which could be quite soon, after that, there will be even more, that will accentuate even more, I think, the discrepancy between the very rich and the poor. And it says, they know in advance when to create panics to their advantage. They also know when to stop panic. Inflation and deflation work equally well for them when they control finance. Very interesting. And you might ask, well, they created the Panic of '08, and how come, they had to ask for a bailout? I think because they didn't know the system that they created, all the derivatives, and they didn't expect, the crash to become a total meltdown. So they had to, ask the public again through the politicians to bail them out. So in this latest article, Goldman Sachs, finds that most recessions are caused by the Fed tightening rates. And also there's a chart here I want to show in the same article, and it's from Bank of America. And they say that every tightening episode usually ends with a financial event. So if you look at the chart here, we go 1929, Wall Street crashed, the Fed had to hike rates, and then the stock market crash. 1937, I think the Fed raised interest rates, and that was a mistake, and the market corrected sharply. Then you have 1970 there, Penn Central Bank. They hiked. I think that bank failed. 1974 as well, Franklin National Bank. These were all, didn't really hurt there wasn't a systemic thing. It wasn't as bad as '08, of course. And then in 1982, when Volcker had raised rates to, just before that, 1980, 81, he raised rates to 20%. You had the Latin American debt crisis, 1982. 1987, stock market crash. You see the Fed raised rates going into that crash. Same thing, the latest, the subprime crisis, 07, 08. The Fed had started raising rates in 04 all the way, I think, to June 2006. And now again, the Fed's starting to raise rates. And Bank of America is saying what's going to be the financial events. I'm sure the insiders will know what that is, and they'll position themselves, and they'll have enough, ammunition to benefit. And the people and the sheeple, as usual, will lose their shirt. So at the end of this article, it says Goldman's conclusion. First, the dominant cause of post-war recessions, monetary policy tightening in response to high inflation, often boosted by oil shocks, looks much less threatening. So they're saying that the first cause of recessions is the Fed. by tightening policy, monetary policy. And it says, second, this does not mean that over-tightening is not a risk. Tightening cycles in the late 50s were quite tame, but nonetheless ended in recession. So, you know, the Fed might hike one more time, and you might say, oh, it's only, you know, 1.5% or 1.25%. That's not that much. But coming from zero, that could cause a recession. And the other reason they give is like animal spirits, you know, sentiment driven, you know, asset prices. But I think, personally, I think that's really caused by the monetary, you know, climate, tight or loose. So yeah, that's what I wanted to talk about. So Lindbergh Sr., Congressman Lindbergh, was right about the Federal Reserve, and he opposed it strongly, Federal Reserve Act, but it went through, unfortunately. And he was right about, you know, the Federal Reserve making like the credit cycle like scientific. I think he also used that word, creating booms and busts and benefiting the insiders, the people who knew when things were going to happen. You know, like I think Joe Kennedy, JFK's dad, he was an insider. He went short the stock market just before the 29 crash. I'm sure Warren Buffett and George Soros, you know, they get prior, you know, a wink, you know, we're going to do that. And that's why these guys have made fortunes. But only because you have a centralized monopoly private monopoly controlling the credit and the money of a nation. And personally, I think the U.S. Constitution leaves it to the market to do that. The only purpose of government is to regulate the value of the method of payment, you know, the gold coins or silver coins, not the interest rates and the credit market. So we'll see what happens if the Fed is going to cause another recession. They probably will, I think. Because I've had a look as well at the 2-year note, and I'll show it to you here. That's the 2-year note yield going back to 1990, and every time, you know, the Fed kind of follows that. So the market has a little bit of say in it as well, but the Fed also, by acting, you know, in the markets, affect the 2-year notes. And it looks like we're back to levels that are quite important. I spoke to a friend the other day, yesterday, who's been in the treasury market, bond markets for 30 years, and he's still there in the city. And he said, Mario, keep an eye on the 2-year note yield. Right now it's around 134, and he said if we break above 138, that means that the Fed will continue to hike. But if we break back below 130 and go towards 1%, it means that they probably stop. So if you enjoyed this video, give me a thumbs up. Share it far and wide. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't yet. And watch my videos on Steemit and follow me on Steemit as well. STEEMIT.com. I'll talk to you later. Bye.